All right. Last but certainly not least, and the final presentation for our short education presentation sessions is VMware with an introduction to Zero Trust Security in a Virtual Environment. Gabriel Maciel?
Maciel, yep.
Is a former police officer with more than 16 years of experience in information systems, networking and security, and IT systems architecture. Gabriel is currently working as a staff systems engineer, networking and security, and member of the CTO Ambassador program at VMware. Gabriel is also a regular speaker at national and international events where he shares his technical experience with clients, end users, and enterprises. Gabriel's background also includes technical managerial positions in the consulting, government and public sector, and financial services industry. An introduction to Zero Trust Security in the Virtual Environments, the standard approach to securing data centers, has emphasized strong perimeter protection to keep threats on the outside of the network. However, the model is ineffective for handling new types of threats. What is needed is a better model for data center security, one that assumes threats can be anywhere and probably are anywhere, and act accordingly. Please welcome Gabriel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. When you think about the state of IT security and security in general, it's pretty sad. So today, the only thing that is outpacing the amount of budget that we are spending in IT and security is the losses that we are having from it. So we believe that there is a fundamental architectural issue that we have to solve. When we think about how the traditional patterns in the data center have changed, we go from this model where we had everything contained in one system, and we started moving to a model where we broke that into different tiers, the application tiers, the web tier, and then we started adding message buses, and then we started communicating with authentication systems. The only thing that we didn't change was the pattern for putting security controls that were going to protect the different workloads. So to respond to this, we try to create zones, demilitarized zone, public access zone, web application zone, etc. And these zones still had to attract the traffic to where the security controls were. This was a fundamental shift in the software development lifecycle that didn't happen in security at the same time. When you think about containers, when you think about microservices, for example, imagine how much this is going to impact the traffic patterns inside your data centers and how much that is going to impact you when you also think about workloads that will potentially go from one data center to another data center, from your data center to a cloud provider. So if you take a look at a blueprint, this is a real blueprint from one of my clients that I have permission to use, you see that it is also, even in the current state, where we have 80% of the traffic in an east-west manner flowing in the data center and 20% going north-south, even with this state, it's hard to determine what is the security posture. And it is hard to determine, but because we need to understand from where we are looking at it. So are we looking from the first firewall at the security posture? Are we looking from the second zone? What are the controls that we have in line? So this complexity also is reflected when we try to provision new services. So how many layers do we have to take into account to provision new security services, and how much time does it take? This is something that we believe can be improved. Because today, when we see why breaches are still happening, we see that in the cyber kill chain, right? If you take Lockheed Martin and you think about this phase approach about how breaches happen, you see that first, low priority systems are compromised. And then we have this lateral move. Of course we have this lateral move because we built data centers to be hyper-connected. We built the internet to connect all of us. That also makes, you a little bit vulnerable because, somebody that shouldn't be your next door neighbor may be your next door neighbor. So then, once you infiltrate, and this is another problem with the traditional security approach, a lot of the security controls that we have are there to prevent infiltration and not exfiltration. So now we have this unconstrained communication. Once we pass the zoning, everything can flow and move laterally without little or no control. So if you think about this room, once you pass the doors, we are all inside the same room, right? So we try to take different approaches to solve this problem by virtualizing some of the security controls or putting more firewalls internally just to try to reduce the ratio of security controls to endpoints. In other words, if we have one system protecting 3,000 systems or 2,000 systems, we try to reduce the radius blast for this. But what we really want is to protect every single one of the workloads that we have. We want to build a demilitarized zone around every single endpoint. And by endpoint, I'm not limiting that concept to only a server or a virtual desktop or a physical system. It could be, an endpoint can be our tablets or our phones as well. So when we think about this, James Clapper, the US Director of National Intelligence, compare today's network to the Titanic with these big compartments. And what we want to build is something closer to a model what a nuclear submarine would have. And we are building a model that will allow us to have networks that can be breached, but just because you breach a little bit of the network doesn't mean that you own the whole network. So how do we do this? If we draw from astronomy and astrobiology, this concept of the Goldilocks Zone, and probably you are all familiar with it, this perfect place where planet Earth is, that is not too close to the sun, that is too hot, and it's not too far, that is too cold, where life cannot be sustained. So if we draw from that concept and we try to apply that concept to our data centers and our security posture, we believe that we have a Goldilocks zone in security, and given that virtualization is a layer that is everywhere, in the cloud, on-prem, between different providers, now we have a point of insertion that is not too close or not too far. So let me explain this concept. In traditional security, when you want high context, you install an agent. The fundamental problem with agents is that while you gain a lot of context, at the same time you are too close to what you want to protect. And you depend on the execution environment to protect the execution environment. So there's a circular dependency there. This is a fundamental problem. So then we said, okay, don't worry, I get it. We're going to put security a little bit far, and we are going to put security where I can get a little bit more isolation. So we put security at the perimeter. The problem with this is, yes, I have higher levels of isolation, but now I have low context. So in other words, I cannot use the same semantics to create my security policies. A firewall doesn't understand what a virtual machine is. I cannot use VM1 to VM2. I cannot use human language to program a security policy because that control doesn't understand what a virtual machine is. This is just an example. That's what I'm talking about, context. So what if we could leverage the right context and the right level of isolation where I don't depend on an agent to deliver my security services, and I'm not too far that I don't have a context. And we believe that virtualization is the layer of security that is in that Goldilocks zone where we have high context and high level of isolation. Now, it gets very interesting because once I start delivering security services, I can also extend those services to networking services. So now I can deliver security detached from an agent with high context and high levels of isolation, and also allow third-party services to integrate with those security controls and have the context that they didn't have before because they were too far on the network. So that's why we believe that security is that Goldilocks zone. And when we have to represent this in a conceptual diagram, that diagram will be that every single workload is not now protected as if it had its own demilitarized zone. And it will prevent this lateral move. It will allow the service insertion that we want. It will allow service chaining as well. So if an antivirus vendor detects a malware, can I make my firewall vendor quarantine that VM on an isolated network? So that is service chaining. And when you think about how we implement that directly in the input-output chain of each individual network interface card before even touching the network. So we have a great point of insertion that allows us to do security and provide additional services with partner integration, with rich context, and the ability to automate and action. So we are protecting and defending at the same time. And we are not focusing only on intrusion, but we have intrusion, extrusion, plus the integration with the partners as well. This is just a quick and short educational session. We have a full session in a few minutes at 2 p.m., room 302. If you want to hear about the cyber kill chain, if you want to hear about what are the 3 main pillars of this zero trust approach and how we can leverage a layer that we all have, please come and visit us, and I thank you very much for your time.